There's a book that was sent to me that I talked to a young, enthusiastic publicist about. It's called The Father-Daughter Talk. It had been a very long, trust me when I say long, time since we've talked about fathers sitting down and talking to their daughters as mothers should sit down and talk to their sons, not in a negative way. So I asked to see the book, and the book arrived. And I just was so enthused about this book, and so enthused that the author of the book is an African-American man who's a senior pastor at the New Home Family Worship Center in New Orleans, Louisiana, and in Houston, Texas. He is the eldest son of a bishop, and he and his brother oversee a network of churches, a host of national television programs, and they own and operate KKNO, which is a Christian radio station in New Orleans. All right, my brother used to live there. We used to go there all the time, and they don't call it New Orleans. I wonder if RC calls it Nolans. Please join me as we welcome the author of The Father-Daughter Talk, R.C. Blake Jr. Hello, R.C., how are you?
I am fantastic, and how are you?
I'm, what is it, blessed and highly favored.
I can tell by the sound of your voice.
Claiming it every day, claiming it.
Amen.
Speak,
Amen.
What is it, Pastor? Speak the things. Speak the
that
thing.
Be not.
That be not as if they are. And that's
right.
What you're talking about in this book. First of all, tell us a little bit about you. One is raised in the home of a pastor, a bishop. What made you decide to follow in his footsteps? How did you get the calling? I'm reminded of a friend of our family's, and I may have told this to my audience before, but it's appropriate now. He was a minister. And on the side, he did home repairs. You remember in the day when in your church you had a deacon that did the plastering and
That's right.
a deacon that could put the wood paneling up and the like. So we always used this deacon. And he became a minister and a lay minister in the church. And his son was an assistant to him. And so they were putting a fireplace in my family home. And my mother had bought this fireplace, and they were putting the fireplace up for her. And she asked him, well, where is your son? And he said, and he replied, well, he says he was called to preach, and he quit to go off and preach. And Mommy said, called to preach. And the man said, I don't know who called him, but he's not going to be working for a while. I'm glad they got a chuckle out of you. So what made you know that you were called?
Because I could not resist it. Actually, growing up, because I had been in church all of my life and had seen the good and the bad relative to church, I had made a decision that when I would get out of high school, that I would intentionally go away for college so that I could get away from church entirely. And little did I know, there would be an irresistible unction, if you would, an urge to follow in my father's footsteps right before I would graduate from high school. I did everything I could to resist that. It was not in vogue. It was not cool. But it was something that I could not resist. And somehow, even with that immature state of mind, I knew that this was my path in life. And I answered that call, and that's been 32 years ago now.
How has the ministry changed? Because when I read the title of your book and looked at your family history, I thought to myself, this is the old way. This is the way we used to do it. We used to talk about it in Sunday school. Girls were talked to. But I'm not so sure they did it father to daughter. Although some did, but it was, don't you do that, don't you do that. And in this book, that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about telling your daughter from a man's point of view. Is this a new way of thinking in churches, or have churches been doing this all along and we just haven't known about it?
I think, personally, I think that it is a new way of thinking, and it's a new approach, because I have to admit, being the father of two adult daughters and one daughter that's getting ready to go to college, my older girls, the adults, kind of pulled me on the carpet after they had come of age, graduated from college, had their careers on point. And they had a meeting with me, and they said to me in no uncertain terms, just because we're grown doesn't mean that we don't need you to yet parent us. It is a new approach because I was raised to believe that daughters were mother's job and sons were the father's job. And so as it relates to my parenting, I kind of missed it with my older girls until they had that candid conversation with me to make me understand that there were certain things that I needed to impart into them that their mother could not impart. And it was from that point that I started revamping my parental style, and I started looking at my relationship with my daughters. I have 3 girls and 1 son. My son is the youngest kid. And I realized through the process that there are things that a father can communicate to his daughter even more effectively than her mother. And it's out of that perspective that some of this approach comes.
I love it. I want to open up the phone lines because we're going to be talking. We'll find out how he began. You said it was from there that the approach began. Before I read chapter 1, I love chapter 1. We talked about this all weekend, that the dress of these young women have just gone out of style. The attitude. We have monitors here in the studio, and television monitors are on because of the news and all that other kind of stuff. And what is this? The hip hop in New York, Brooke? And Pastor, whores and prostitutes wore clothes like this. I mean, Victoria's Secret was supposed to be a secret. Hello, somebody. So when you began to talk this way, did you write it all down? Or did you try things on your daughter gradually? We have to take a break. Hold that. We'll get back to his answer. And then I'll read you from chapter 1. I love it. Your dress code is your personal commercial. The book is called The Father-Daughter Talk, and the author is R.C. Blakes Jr. And in chapter 1, he says, your dress code is your personal commercial. It was evening, and I was reading through some Facebook postings of friends, he writes, family and church members, and there it was. It was a message from a young lady who was visibly attractive and obviously intelligent, based on her use of words. In spite of the initial positive impression, the posting quickly turned bizarre. As I continued to read, she wrote something that had the undertones of a woman not short of clueless. In her post, she was addressing other women. She said, try your brains, use your articulation and your education, and when all else fails, fall back on your booty, as in derriere, behind, bottom, or buttocks. I was shocked. That's the first chapter beginning in the book called The Father-Daughter Talk, R.C. Blakes Jr. We were talking about the way young women are today, and you were getting ready to answer me, R.C. You want to go ahead before we go to the phones?
Yes, I would like to. I am a pastor, so I was looking at that posting from a pastoral perspective, and I think this was on a Friday, just before the weekend. Sunday would come. And after I read it, I had the inclination, I would say in the church circle, the leading of the Lord, that the natural fathers in the lives of daughters are quite often today out of place. They're either physically absent or they are emotionally disconnected. And as a consequence, our daughters are being sexualized by society through media, television, whatever it might be. And they are dressing in vogue, and they are missing the mark relative to their core values. Many of them are dressed, as you put it, like prostitutes, but inwardly it's not who they are. So they're misrepresenting themselves because they've not had a father to pull them on the carpet and say, this is not the way you dress. With my younger daughter, Rachel, she's 17. She'll be going off to college next year. And she one day went out and bought some clothing, and it was inappropriate as far as I was concerned. She came and she brought it home, and I said to her, "You can't wear that." And she went through the teenage thing where she was crying. But I noticed something. When I set the guidelines relative to what is acceptable and what is proper, from that day forward, she was about 13 then, she would go shopping, and when she would come home, she would knock on my door, and she would go into my bathroom, and she would try it on and say, "Dad, what do you think about this?" And I would say yay or nay. But I've noticed something. She changed her approach to dressing when her father sat her down and said, "This is not appropriate." Society is sexualizing our girls way too early before they even have a conscience or concept. And it is the responsibility of fathers to establish dignity within the minds of their own daughters. So out of that experience, being a natural father and a pastor of so many young women who many times don't even know how to dress coming to church, I began to have these conversations and this discussion personally, privately, but then I developed a sermon series where I talked for 4 weeks relative to the father-daughter talk, addressing these issues in this book.
Let me ask this question, and then we'll go to the phones. I have so much to talk to you about. The website is www.rcblakes.com. That's RC, everything lowercase. rcblakes.com. Let's do a little role playing. Both of us have daughters. I had a daughter. You had daughters. I'm the oldest of 6, and there are 4 girls. Let's talk about what they used to say in our day, the way you were raised and I was raised, that how you dress depicted who you are. And I don't think, and this is a point, one of the points I want you to address, I don't think that has changed. What has changed is the commercialization of sexuality. And it's appearing to children younger and younger. When you watch how these mothers enter their daughters into these beauty contests.
Absolutely.
Put caps on their teeth. Give them fake eyelashes. They're 3 years old. Give them hair pieces. Give them stockings and baby things. And what it says, to my way of thinking, is that mother always wanted to be in a beauty contest, couldn't, and now she's making her little daughter that way, sexualizing. But because everything is acceptable now, no one says that. No one's saying sex is bad. We're saying that there's a proper way for everything and a proper behavior. But the girls would say, and here's where you step in, Pastor Daddy. Here's where you step in. But Daddy, the boys like it. They like it when you dress like this. And if I don't dress like this, Daddy, I won't have a boyfriend. I won't have a date for the prom. What's wrong with it? Everyone's doing it, Daddy.
One of the things that I have really drilled into my girls, my biological daughters, as well as those spiritual daughters who are part of my ministry, is that, number one, we have to dismantle even, the lie that a woman is deficient if she does not have a man. I believe that has to be dismantled, because I believe this generation of young women view the attainment of a relationship with a man as the highest accomplishment. And as a consequence, the morality, the values are lapsing and falling lower and lower just for the purpose of putting herself in a position to win whatever that might be, the affections of some man. I believe we have to start there. And that's where I start. I've raised my girls to understand that, Oprah Winfrey is not a mistake. That there is more to life than just living to have a man on your arm. And if you become a slave to that kind of mentality, there's no limit to the lows you might sink to accomplish that.
But the women say, the young women say, but the boys like me this way. Now, in the olden days, we would say, yeah, they do. They like to play with you, but they don't like to stay with you. They like to flaunt you. But when they start talking about mama's babies, and all you have to do is look at these women on these shows. I might not mind it so much, Pastor, if there were a balance. If there were shows that showed positive sides of African American women, Home and Garden Channel, Food Channel, all these kinds of
Absolutely.
things. If we were there, if the sitcoms showed us as something other than squealing and hollering and yelling and all of that was one of the beauties of the Cosby Show and still is.
Absolutely.
That actually he portrayed the kind of people you grew up with. There were people, even no matter where you were economically, there was someone on your street or two streets over that was a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, a preacher, worked in the mill, worked for the garbage department, somebody in your community that could set an example. Part of the problem I see is that there is no one setting the example. And Pastor, we might as well tell the truth. The mamas are just as bad as some of the daughters. That's where they're getting it from.
I think that is probably the biggest issue with this generation, is that the parental example that is being set by these young mothers is so poor because they have been fatherless. Either a father has been physically absent or emotionally, and they've not gotten the kind of instruction. Their values are lacking. And so now this becomes somewhat of a generational curse, as we might say in the church. And that's simply where the next generation is conditioned by the ignorance of the former generation. I believe, and this is what we teach, that a young woman should dress to attract, or rather dress to project conviction rather than dress to attract attention.
But Pastor, let me stop you for just a moment.
Yes, ma'am.
And we know you're not speaking religiously because that's the denomination you belong to. We're having a spiritual conversation, folks, so you can join in. Pastor, but the real deal is, do young men want that? In our day, you were told by your daddy, no young man wants to take a whore home.
That's right.
I mean, and we called it exactly what it was. Now you have them getting shows on reality shows and being paid unbelievable sums of money. And I don't know whether you've seen the latest show, but it's about a minister who is a bachelor and his mother used language.
Wow.
That was totally unbecoming through a mother of a minister. She was vulgar and lowlife. And the first thing I thought was, I don't know whether I want to go to that church.
I have not seen that show, thankfully. But I think this is the kind of truth that we have to begin to herald once more. You know, we can no longer ignore it. I think those of us who are enlightened and understand better have the responsibility to use whatever platform we might have to really interject in the conversation with this generation that what you're doing is self-destructive and that there is a better way.
And tell why and show them why. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll let you talk at 1-888-669-2281. Into the break, a quote from the book. No woman in any era should use public attire to stir sexual excitement. Welcome to the third hour of the Bev Smith Show. I am enjoying this conversation because we don't hear this kind of a dialogue in public. White, black, orange, green, glowing in the dark. We don't hear it. And if it goes on, it must be going on some other language-speaking radio show because it's not going on our English-speaking. We are not having these conversations. That's why I welcome the book. The book is called The Father-Daughter Talk. It's written by R.C. Blakes Jr. He's the senior pastor at New Hope Family Worship Center. He has two locations, New Orleans, or as they say, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Houston, Texas. He's the eldest son of the late Bishop Robert C. Blake Sr., and he and his brother Samuel oversee a network of churches. He has a radio station, KKNO. It's a Christian station in New Orleans. And he holds a master's degree in theology, and he speaks around the country, and you can find out more about him when you go to rcblakes.net. We have people holding, but I want to just say, do young men really want decent women? You know, Don't bring them home. I know your father told you that. There's some women you just can't bring home, and you didn't want to bring them home because you knew they did not represent what was demanded of you, the type of woman that was expected out of you. Now, some folks might say that was elitist and everything, but when you look at the common denominator, and I mean common in terms of behavior, one would think you'd want to push upward and get something better. But is that what young black men want? Or is it what the young black man media chooses to show us want? Pastor, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, did you hear the question?
I did not.
Okay, let me give it to you again. Whoa, that was good too. I hope I can give it like I gave it before. The short of it is that we were talking about the way women dress, and we were talking about that quote. I love that quote, that women should not have to dress a certain way to make them sexually attractive, because that's exactly what they do. They show everything, and the thing was, don't show it all. Give them something to think of. Let's give them something to think about. Let's give them something to think about. That was a part of the charm. That was a part of the allure, the fact. But that's not it now, and that certainly isn't what they project on television. In the meantime, what we want to know is, you were talking about young men and how they behave and what they want and what women should do to give them what they want. But don't they want these kinds of women? Because the women are in absolute competition to get these guys, and they don't demand anything out of these guys. Droopy pants, pimping them. I mean, seriously, what do men want?
Well, I think one has to determine his or her definition of a man. A man wants a wife. A man wants a woman that has dignity and a self-respect about herself. Now, if you're going to put yourself in the general marketplace, as most of these young women are doing for these guys that may be grown males but are not men, they're simply grown boys. All they want, the reality is, all they want is a sexual experience. And they want to put that woman on an emotional roller coaster that goes fast but goes nowhere. And what will happen is that woman will discover, as many women across this nation are discovering now, that she will give that man almost her entire youth, even give him children, and he won't have enough respect for her to give her a ring. And the same man that plays with that woman for decades sometimes, when he grows up and matures and really understands the value of a wife, he will leave her with the children he made with her and go and find a woman that had self-respect. I see it all the time in the church. A woman does herself a disservice when she plays into this sexualized culture and she becomes a participant in this competition, as you put it. She's dismantling her own dignity, and it's going to end up hurting her.
And hurt, it does. Look at our magazine articles, black, white, or whatever ethnic group. We're all writing about the same thing. The pain. I just watched all through the Valentine's Day month of February, you're going to be seeing these films about relationships, and most of them are very painful relationships, and they all seem to start out the same way, with a woman meeting a man and jumping into bed instantly.
Absolutely.
Instantly. And the media projects it. The other day there was AIDS, a National Day of Awareness. You didn't see that much about it because there is an attempt to get you to believe that sexually transmitted diseases are being abated, but they're not. They are not. And in our community, on black campuses, or where there's large populations of young people, it is spreading like a fire in a dry desert. It is spreading, and no one is talking about it. That's what makes your book so important. But what do the boys want? Because they take these girls out, and it's almost as if it's a ring around the roses, so to speak, a ring around the toilet, a ring around the bathtub, a ring around the light. And here's how it goes. This darkening of the light. The young boy tries to get the attention of the young girl, and in order to get the money to attract her, to be able to buy her clothes, get her hair done, get her nails done, and whatever else. And I'm generalizing because there are some women that don't do this, but far more than we like. And then she entices him, and he goes out and commits crime so that he can keep her. So she entices him so that he can go out and get things for her. So are you following me, Pastor?
Yes, I am.
Am I on to something here?
I think you very much so are on to something. It is a society that is constantly plummeting relative to our moral code. I was asked a question relative to my stance on sexuality and abstinence. Is that realistic to teach that in today's culture? And my answer was, certainly it's not realistic. Not in today's culture. It's not realistic, but it's idealistic. If we continue as a society to settle for what is realistic, that bar is dropping almost every year. The only way to return from these moral lows that we've hit is to begin to reach for the ideals again that you and I were raised upon, to begin to shine light into that dark place of ignorance, and to begin to say to these young people, there is a better way, and this is why you need to follow this path. This is the path of self-actualization and true happiness, because most of these young people that run this rat race, at the end of it, they're still miserable. If they're listening now, you know, they have all of the things, they're having sex, they're doing all of this stuff that society says is cool, but inwardly they are broken. The only way to recover from that condition is to begin to reach for the ideals of life again, which are contained, from my perspective, in the Word of God, and begin to respect yourself as a woman and even as a man, and begin to live for something higher than the gratifications of the flesh. That's my message.
And a good message it is. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just straight up. I want to talk about the church.
Yes.
Because
please.
One of the things, I'm a good Baptist-costal.
Me too.
I'm real good. Me too. I mean, my mother moves across the pew when I'm there because I'll holler. And just,
like what?
If I can cheer for the Steelers, I can cheer for the Steeler of Steelers, the ultimate football player. You know what I mean?
Yes, ma'am.
Anyway, Pastor, because we could get started. But one of the things that I want to talk about is you talked about the church. Now, a lot of churches have Saturday Night Live, and I really do love Saturday Night Live. It's as if when I used to go and do Bible study with some Seventh-day Adventists, it's as if I practiced that Saturday thing. It really is. Like, that is it. Saturday is the Sabbath. And I want to go here, and I want to see. Pastor, I don't want to see short shorts in church. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see low-cut blouses in church.
Yes.
I just don't want to see it. I don't want to see blue jeans in church unless it's going to a picnic party, or if you're working with kids in the nursery or something like that, okay. As long as they don't look like you're getting ready to go to the club afterward. I don't want to see that. Have the churches instituted dress codes?
I think that because the church has gravitated towards more of a seeker-friendly type approach, that we have, in many instances, lapsed in terms of our standards, the church. And let me speak specifically about the black church, since that is my experience.
All right, hold that point. We'll take a break. And when we come back, do you have time to take callers? We're loaded with callers that want to talk to you. Can you take a couple? Can you take a couple? I twisted his arm. He's in a hotel room getting ready to give a speech tomorrow. I twisted his arm. We need to talk about this after this. From the book by our guest, R.C. Blakes Jr., The Father-Daughter Talk, he writes, "Don't settle for treatment that is beneath you. Consider this testimony of an anonymous Caucasian woman. I entered into a relationship with a man who appeared to be the finest of gentlemen. He did all the right things, from opening the door to buying flowers and remembering special days. A strange twist came when he was terminated from his job and did not have the financial means to continue his accustomed lifestyle. I then learned that he associated his self-identity with his occupation. His self-esteem worth was the size of his paycheck. He began to resent me for providing for the family. He initially became withdrawn, and it went on to snapping and complaining about everything. It ultimately morphed into physical assaults, accompanied with verbal hashings. He would call me every vulgar name imaginable as he kicked and hit me. He would always cry and apologize after every episode. I actually stayed in this cycle for 5 years. We're talking. You wanted to finish up on that point, Pastor? This is an excellent, excellent chapter, by the way.
Well, thank you. Too often we see women who are trapped in abusive relationships, and she's come to define that abuse as love. I'm amazed when I sit in my office and I talk with young women who are in these types of relationships, and it is so difficult to get her to understand that physical abuse does not equal love. She can see everything relative to how he had a rough upbringing or how he's struggling in this area, and this is why she makes excuses for his physical violence towards her. And there are many that are listening to us tonight who are settling for these kinds of relationships because they feel that they cannot do better. And many times they feel, I've heard it said, that a piece of man is better than none at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly do not agree with that. And being the father of 3 girls, their safety for me is paramount. And the one thing we discuss is a man that has any kind of aggressive tendencies towards you. I don't care if it's as little, some might say, as raising his voice. That is an indication that that is not a man that you should spend your life with. No man should ever be aggressive towards a woman. It's unacceptable.
It is a cowardly move, too. It is a cowardly move. And really what he's doing is beating up on himself.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. The problem is him. And the woman should know that right away, because the real deal is you cannot heal him. You cannot heal him. And truth of the matter is, you cannot change him. He has to want.
Cannot.
You can. I know firsthand. You cannot change them. They have to want to change themselves. It's time for us to take a couple of callers. We appreciate your patience as we talk to R.C. Blakes Jr., because we could go on and on. The book is The Father-Daughter Talk. We'll get to what he said and how she responded. But first, let's go to you. Thank you for holding, caller. Who am I talking to and where are you calling from?
This is Jihad at WLK in Atlanta.
Thank you, Jihad. Welcome to the show. Please say hello to R.C., Pastor Blakes.
Hello, Pastor Blake. How are you doing?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing great. Pastor Blake, You almost made me have an accident while I was riding down the highway, so let's jump into it. The last thing I heard was the advice that you gave your 3 daughters, and you mentioned that Oprah was not a mistake. Can you explain that a little bit more for me?
Well, by that I meant Oprah Winfrey has a mentality relative to life that expands her perspective beyond simply having a relationship with a man as being the epitome of life. I think today, as we raise daughters and young women, we have to focus them on personal vision and self-actualization, because the realities are that many of them may never have a significant relationship with a man. And if we do not teach them to reach for those higher marks of personal achievement, and if we allow them to settle into what society tells them is the ultimate, which is a relationship with even a piece of a man, I think we then set them up for failure.
Okay.
And Jihad,
So,
I also
yeah.
took it, and this is just from a woman's point of view when he said this, to mean that she was no mistake. That was hard work. She was abused. That
Absolutely.
could have destroyed her. She doesn't lie about that, and she doesn't lie about dabbling in drugs. She does not lie about those things that shaped her as she is. But what she did is not allow that to ruin her life. And some people give in. She was no mistake. She was thoroughly, thoroughly open to receiving her blessings, and she prepared for them. That's what I thought you meant, Pastor.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, and also, well, here's where I have the issue. We're talking to a religious man, and I assume that the basis of any religious man is what God said or what God designed.
Absolutely.
So it appears that God has designed man and woman to come together for a union, and because we have these obstacles in our way today, to say we should abandon that course rather than challenge that course, rather than teach it appears to me, and I could be wrong, and I'll listen to you, that we have obviously given up and the evil people have won. Because what the evil people have forced you to do is to promote an unnatural concept for your daughters, an unnatural concept that well, I think you said a second ago that she might not even get a half a man.
So no. You didn't hear him. You didn't hear him right. Mm-hmm. He said, and I think it's important that he did not say what you thought you heard. He said there was a saying, and that he hears it from young women in his congregation. And you know women have said it, Jihad, that a half a man is better than no man at all. And he said that was wrong. Right. That's what he said. And then I don't know how...
And I understand that. I'm agreeing with him.
Okay, but...
I'm agreeing with that, but I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is that we have accepted this. So, and we are, the spiritual people, are supposed to stay focused on what produces a good man and a good woman, even though the world appears to be beating us.
Absolutely.
And what I'm saying is that we can't abandon what we know is the natural way to adjust to the evil people and their way because it appears that they're winning. And if they force us to now accept unnatural situations as the alternative to what was supposed to be natural situations, then we've lost. And if we've lost, we've lost the battle. I would say, and I'll leave you with this, Reverend, and I appreciate you and your book and everything. But I would say that the religious people, the spiritual people, you and I, we have just not put forth the effort and the money to counter the message that the evil people put out on a 24-hour basis. And we stopped calling the evil people and their agenda evil. We started calling it politically correct. We started saying, don't judge, don't do this. So consequently, if our daughters and if our sons hear this particular language and they see that the evil people are not even being challenged, where we see in Atlanta, billboards all over Atlanta with the preacher and his wife on every doggone corner, on every expressway. Now take your wife and your image down and put up some strong moral messages. Yeah. Put up some strong moral teaching. You know what I mean? And that's all I'm saying, and I appreciate what you're saying.
And listen, let me say this to you. I appreciate you, and I really feel the spirit behind your sentiment, and I appreciate it. And I agree with you. And I believe in the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman. My message just happens to be to address these young women whose reality is so twisted that they are settling for relationships that are abusive and destructive. I agree with you that we must take our daughters and we must train our daughters and we must train our sons so that we can return to those highest places of values that you speak of. I agree with everything you're saying.
Let me just ask that. Let me just.
It's possible. And I believe that it's possible. I
is
just
possible.
believe that we haven't put forth. We abandoned the effort.
Okay.
Can I say
opinion.
something else to you before we leave?
Okay, go ahead.
I believe this is where religion has failed. We have allowed religion, man's concepts, to break down our approach to teaching and training our people. Religion in the black church has become, in a lot of instances, nothing more than entertainment. And when it comes to dealing with real issues that will transform the mind, many times our churches are falling short. Religion is falling short.
Okay.
So I agree with you. We have to return to those ideals.
All right, I have to take a break. We thank you, Jihad, for your point. We thank you for bringing that up. But I was listening intently to both of you. And I have a point I want to raise with you on the point that Jihad made after this. From the book, The Father-Daughter Talk, R.C. Blake Jr. writes, most men will say anything for sex. One of the great mysteries of the times is that young women remain ignorant regarding the devices of malicious young men, even though the game has been the same for thousands of years. This is when the amen comes in. Why don't women know better? Why can't they simply recognize the tendencies? Why do the same women fall for the same tricks repeatedly with different men? Why? Perhaps this verse applies. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will reject thee. Hosea 4:6. Women generally fall prey to the misdealings of men for this exact reason. They either lack or reject the truth. Far too often, a woman clearly sees that a man has no noble intentions, yet she ignores the elephant in the room, simply hoping she can convince him to be the one. Pastor, I was listening to you in Jihad Talk, and I was listening to you talk about the thing that neither one of you said, but you said it loudly, and that is same-sex marriage. And when I think, and I had some Bible class, 13 years of it. I just love to study the Bible and the Hebrew and the Quran and all of it. It's just wide open. And as I was reading, and particularly the New Testament, as again, the Old Testament is supposed to be a guide, but it was a guide. It is the history of the Jew and the relationship the Jewish community had with God, no matter who you think that the Jews are, the real Jews. And so I was wondering about the lack of love on this issue. Because if we tell the truth, in our churches today, regardless of the denomination, we have gay men and gay women. They sing in the choir, they play the piano, they are deacons in the church, they are trustees, they support, they cook the dinners, they plan the programs. They're members of the church. But because the church has been so judgmental and didn't want to talk about the issue, the restriction, I have to ask this question. As I read, and especially if you do the Hebrew and the Greek, when it describes the kind of man Yeshua was, it does not discuss him as a man of judgment, although there was judgment. But even with judgment, he gave the possibility for grace and mercy, so that he looked at all of us the same, sinners. He looked at all of us the same, but he had no judgment, and he called them out. And look, if you're so cool, you have never committed a sin or anything, you pick up and throw the stone.
That's right.
And no one could do it. So I worry when I hear people say, well, we're not standing up, because the church has been almost brutal in its attempt. Religion, organized religion, almost brutal. I mean, we had a man, he's dead now, a preacher who went to Arlington Cemetery and cursed the men and women that died. They didn't cause the war, politicians did.
Right.
And cursed them. So I'm wondering, what's that song, Where is the Love? Where is the love?
You know, that this is an issue that recently I have begun to address. relative to the church's position stance on homosexuality. Of course, I have to always stay along the lines of what I see is biblically sound, God's position on the matter, God's truth, if you would. And I believe that marriage in the eyes of God is between a man and a woman. However, I do feel that the church has generated such a hatred for people who may have that particular lifestyle. And my question to the congregation that I serve was, would we have the same kind of venom towards a known adulterer or a known drug dealer or a known prostitute?
A thief. A lot of
thief.
women have children who are in jail for stealing and robbing.
And the answer had to come back, no, certainly we would not. We would be able to tell that person, this is what we view to be truth according to God's word. But even in the process of communicating that truth, that person would still feel a sense of acceptance and love from our community. In the church, the homosexual, in many instances in the black church, is the butt of jokes. The homosexual is it's almost articulated that he or she is hated. And my message was that it's not so much the truth we preach as much as it is the way we preach it. And so we have intentionally brought the love back to our message in our church. And as a consequence, there are, as you say, in every church, in every congregation, most of them don't have the liberty to identify themselves, but in every church there are homosexuals. In our ministry, there are homosexuals. And the beauty is that because of the love, now they have such a relationship with me that they can come into my office and discuss their matters with me personally and freely. Mm-hmm. Knowing that they will not be judged or made the topic of discussion in next Sunday's service. And what we're doing is just lovingly guiding and lovingly pastoring and shepherding that particular community. And we're letting God do what God does.
Hello.
Because we can't change anybody. I can't change anyone. That's God's job. My job is to love you, to shepherd you, to teach you the word of God as best I can, and then let you and God work y'all's relationship out as you move forward in life.
I appreciate your going there. That was not what we planned to talk about, but it was brought up. And I think that we must tell it all. We must tell it all. Before I let you go, when you decided to talk to your daughters, and when you decided to tell them the secrets of what it was like to be a man, from a man's point of view, because very often, Pastor, because of the missing father, and we're generalizing because there are a lot of fathers who may not be in the home, but they are involved with their children just the same. And there are a lot of couples who are no longer together, but they've worked out a relationship around those children, and they give the children support from both of them, as does the person that currently is involved in their life. We know that. Unfortunately, they don't get the publicity, they don't get the exposure, and their story doesn't get told unless you know them intimately. But we don't get a chance, we women, to hear from you. That's what made Steve's book so popular. It was a man telling a woman about a man. Well, ding, 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 the lights went on. Isn't that what we're supposed to know? How do I know your secrets? Unless someone tells me the secrets. How do I know? So tell me, right after this break, what did your daughter say? And we'll take another call and we'll let you go right after this. From the book written by our guest, R.C. Blakes Jr., the book The Father and Daughter Talk, the chapter In the Midst of the Storm, he writes, I vividly remember when Hurricane Katrina devastated the city of New Orleans and our ministry there. We evacuated and eventually landed in Houston, Texas. I did not know what the future of our ministry would be in the city of New Orleans. I had no clue if I would ever be able to provide for my wife again as she had been accustomed. I will never forget her words to me. She said, "I can get a job to sustain us." Wow. What if I had married just a pretty face if I hadn't married? It was extremely gratifying to know that my wife could provide and would if necessary. A man who truly loves his spouse would desire for her to be independent of him financially. It should never be viewed as an affront to his manhood if she is capable of carrying the financial load. In fact, any husband who feels it necessary for his woman to be diminished for him to excel is far less than a worthy man. So, Pastor, when you were talking to your daughter, was it over a period of time or did you just sit down? And how did you record these things?
It was over a period of time. I initially started these discussions really with my older girls before I realized it, what I was doing. As they began to come into teenage years, we had a very good relationship relative to our interaction as daughters and father. I would just have very candid discussions with them about what I had done as a young man relative to relationships with young women and how I had many times misused and manipulated. And I would just sit down and just really talk candidly with them about what I did. So when I put myself in the equation, it kind of captured their attention because they knew it was serious. And they really heard me. And I think what happened was it did not take them long to go into the real world as they grew up and to discover that the very games that I said to them as young girls men would play, they began to see it. But because they heard it from their father, they were able to discern it. And it was not able to, or they were not, the brothers were not able to shipwreck my daughter's lives because they had been instructed by their father
On what to do. And I'll tell you something. That's when you separate the wheat from the shaft where men
Absolutely.
are concerned. That's when you do. Let's take a call. This person has been holding for a while and we appreciate it so much. Good evening. Thank you for calling. Who am I speaking to?
How you doing? This is Brother Carl from Palm Beach County, Florida.
Oh, welcome to the show, Brother Carl. Say hello, please, to
How you
RC.
doing, big brother?
Oh, fantastic. How are you?
That's a good thing. I'm thankful to the Creator. You know, I just have another little twist that well, at least the way I was brought up. I thought all of us as human beings, we were looking for an example of a man, right? And if we were Christians, we look toward Jesus. If we were Muslim, we look toward Muhammad. If we're Hebrew, we look toward Moses. But all of us, we always say amen. And I think when we give ourselves a standard, because it's male and female, because I know that, you know, as myself being a man or trying to become a man, I know I needed an example, because if I didn't have an example, then I wouldn't have no clue as it relates to nothing on the planet Earth.
Yes, sir.
And when I think about what we're talking about after we have come through the suffering that we've come through, I think many times we forget how we were destroyed psychologically as it relates to the Spirit of God and the spirit that we need to be passing on to our daughters. I really do look at the deterioration of our women. I mean, the way that they think, because I think many of our little sisters have never ever took a look at their great-great-grandmother's closet where she used to dress herself from. And I think because we have this big disconnect, I kind of get it twisted, because I know that we need some classes, but we need some sisters to reach for a better standard. And
yes, sir.
I think that, I think as a pastor, I think the way that the church used to be, even for me, I used to could go, and the deacons and all of the men in the church were always strong men, and they guided those of us who were young men in the church. They guided us aright. But I see now with the church being filled with our sisters and no real masculine energy.
Wow.
That's where I see the problem really being located. But I do say this. I try to be just like I hope pray that each and every human being that's of the male species will try to present themselves in a godly manner. But I know that that's difficult. And when I hear us talk about the standard, I just always like to really erect a Jesus or Muhammad, a Moses or someone of that caliber. And I think many times we just get, I hope and pray that we will stay focused on the real, what the woman is, because I think she's the greatest of God's creation.
Wow.
And
I agree with you.
We don't know who she is. That's the reason why we do the things that we do. And we need brothers like him to yourself who have the love, the courage, and the strength to help to guide us all right. Please continue to do so. And it's just, I know that everybody got it because we live through the television. Everybody got the empire and everything else. And I know that kind of guides our spirit. But I say to those who are truly godly bound, please let us stay focused on God and his creation, male and female. He created them and called their name Adam. And I think if we would look at ourselves and look at what he has prepared for us, because it is the time for the separation of the wheat and the tear, and the men and the women. And I think we need to set the standards for everybody, regardless of who or what. And, I was just thinking about that bill while y'all were
well, we appreciate your comments. I mean, really and truly, you just reiterated what we're talking about. You just did that. But you know what I really think is part of the problem? And let me try this on both of you as I listened. And then, Pastor, I know you have a word for him. What I think is that along came the civil rights movement of the 60s. And our mind was stayed on freedom, and our leaders were being assassinated. There was an all-out attempt, even with the Black Panthers, to destroy every vestige of an attempt to be free in America. And then all of a sudden, with Johnson filling in for Kennedy, Johnson took what Kennedy had proposed, added to it, and for the first time in our existence on this side of the planet, Africans in America could assume some type of a freedom, they thought. Mm-hmm. And so they jumped to it. They leaped to it. Lottie, 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 I'm free at last. And they left their communities. All of a sudden, it wasn't good enough. The community where we had the doctors and the lawyers, and your neighbor watched out for you, and you could leave your door open and know full well that the neighbor wasn't going to come in there and go through all your stuff. There was a level of integrity. There was pride. There were rules. There were rules. There were behavior rules. I can remember that a young woman would not ever swear out of the window of a bus pastor. And so I that's why, when we're out of time, I can't believe it. That's why I wanted to thank you for this book. I think we need to hear from more men like you. And I want you to keep talking. And now that you have joined the Bev Smith family, you have to take this oath quickly. Can you take the oath quickly with me before we say goodbye?
I don't know what the oath quickly is, but I think I can do it.
Okay, repeat after me. I will come back to the Bev Smith Show.
To the Bev Smith Show.
As soon as I get invited.
As soon as I get invited.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a strong man. What we need in our community is strong Black men. Thank you for being one. God keep you strong, and we'll call you real soon. This conversation is far from over. God bless.